I stood in my kitchen holding Courtney's wedding binder, the one stuffed with receipts, every single charge on my credit cards. My daughter had just screamed at me, her voice still echoing off the walls. "Get out of my life." Those words, after I questioned the $10,000 ice sculpture, $10,000 for frozen water. I'd been a widow for 3 years, raised her alone after Harold died, given her everything. This was my thanks. I set down the binder, grabbed my car keys, and drove to the bank's night deposit box with an envelope I'd prepared weeks ago but never had the courage to use. Card cancellation forms. All of them. The drive home from the bank felt longer than it actually was. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I'd done it. Really done it. Those forms were in the deposit box now, and by morning, every credit card I'd given Courtney over the years would be blocked. No more unlimited access to my accounts. No more charging whatever caught her fancy. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked darker than usual. Empty. I'm 64 years old, and I've lived in this house for 37 years. Harold and I bought it when Courtney was just a baby. We painted her bedroom yellow because she loved sunshine. We built a swing set in the backyard. We hosted birthday parties and graduation celebrations. Now I walked through the front door into silence. I didn't even try to sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold while I replayed the evening in my mind. Courtney had come over to show me the latest wedding plans. I should have known something was wrong when she arrived 2 hours late without apologizing. She just breezed in, dropped her designer purse on my counter, and spread papers everywhere. The ice sculpture was shaped like a swan. Or maybe 2 swans. I couldn't remember anymore. What I remembered was the price. $10,000 for something that would melt before the reception ended. I'd asked, very calmly I thought, if maybe we could find something less expensive. Something that didn't cost as much as I used to make in 3 months of nursing shifts. That's when she exploded. Told me I was ruining her special day. That I'd never understood her. That I was cheap and embarrassing, and she was tired of justifying every choice to me. Then those final words, "Get out of my life." So I did. I pulled up my banking app on my phone around 3 in the morning. My retirement account showed $240,000. That was everything Harold left me, plus what I'd saved from 40 years as a nurse. I'd already spent $75,000 on this wedding. The venue cost $30,000, paid in full. The dress was $8,000. The catering deposit was $15,000. The photographer, the videographer, the DJ, the flowers, the invitations, the party favors. It went on. And Courtney had never held a job longer than 6 months. She always had a reason. The boss was mean, the coworkers were cliquey, the commute was too long, the work was beneath her. Meanwhile, I'd worked double shifts, holidays, weekends. I'd missed Christmases to cover the emergency room so other nurses could be with their families. I'd come home with aching feet and an aching back, and I never complained because I was building something for my daughter. Security. A future. But it was never enough. At 3:15 in the morning, I made another decision. I called the wedding venue. The after-hours emergency line went to voicemail. I left a message, clear and firm. I was canceling the wedding. All of it. I understood I'd lose the deposits. That was fine. Then I called the caterer. Another voicemail, same message. The florist, the photographer, the band. One by one, I called every vendor and canceled. My voice stayed steady, even as my heart pounded. Each cancellation cost me thousands of dollars in non-refundable deposits, money I'd never get back. But I did it anyway because for the first time in I don't know how long, I felt like I was taking control of my own life. By the time dawn broke through my kitchen window, painting everything soft pink and gold, I'd canceled everything. I'd spent the night systematically dismantling the wedding I'd spent 6 months planning and paying for. The wedding Courtney expected would happen in 6 weeks. I finally fell asleep around 6 in the morning, right there at the kitchen table with my head on my arms. I dreamed about Harold. He was sitting across from me, drinking coffee the way he used to, 3 sugars and too much cream. "You're doing the right thing, Lizzie," he said in the dream. His voice was so clear I could almost believe he was really there. I should have done more to stop this when I was alive. I'm sorry I left you to handle her alone. I woke up at 8 to my phone vibrating so hard it nearly danced off the table. Courtney. I stared at her name on the screen, watched it ring and ring until it went to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. By 8:30, she'd called 27 times. Text messages flooded in. "Mom, what did you do? My card isn't working. Call me now. You're ruining my life. How could you do this to me? Answer your phone." I turned the phone off, just pressed the power button, and watched the screen go dark. Then I grabbed my purse and drove to my friend Patricia's house. Patricia answered the door in her bathrobe, took one look at my face, and pulled me inside. She'd been my friend since Courtney was in elementary school. Our daughters had played together, though Patricia's daughter Amy had grown into a responsible adult with a job and an apartment she paid for herself. I told Patricia everything. The ice sculpture, the screaming, the cancellations. She listened without interrupting, pouring me coffee and pushing a plate of toast toward me even though I couldn't imagine eating. When I finished, Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Liz, I need to tell you something. I should have told you weeks ago, but I didn't know if you knew, and I didn't want to hurt you." "What?" I asked. 3 weeks ago, I saw Courtney at Luigi's Steakhouse. She was with a man, not Brandon. My stomach dropped. Brandon was Courtney's fiancé, her supposed love of her life. They were holding hands, Patricia continued, kissing. "This wasn't friendly, Liz. This was romantic. I thought maybe you knew. Maybe they had some kind of arrangement. So I didn't say anything. But now, with everything you're telling me, I think you need to know." The room spun. I gripped the edge of Patricia's kitchen table. My daughter wasn't just entitled and spoiled. She was a cheater. She was planning a wedding to a man she was betraying. And I'd been paying for all of it. I drove home an hour later feeling like I'd been hollowed out. Patricia's words kept echoing in my head. Holding hands. Kissing. Not Brandon. When I pulled into my driveway, I turned my phone back on. It immediately exploded with notifications. 63 missed calls. I stopped counting the text messages after I hit 100. But they weren't just from Courtney anymore. Brandon had called 17 times. My sister Grace had called 9 times. My brother Todd had called 6. There were messages from Courtney's friends, from my cousin's wife, from people I barely knew. I listened to one of Brandon's voicemails. His voice shook with anger. "How could you do this to her, Liz? She's devastated. She's been crying for hours. What kind of mother cancels her daughter's wedding without even talking to her first? You're a monster. You're destroying the woman I love." I deleted it. Grace's voicemail was worse. "Liz, what on earth is going on? Courtney called me sobbing. She says you've lost your mind. She says you canceled her entire wedding behind her back. Please tell me this isn't true. Please call me back so we can fix this." I sat in my car in my own driveway and felt utterly alone. That afternoon, Grace showed up at my house. She didn't knock. She has a key I gave her years ago for emergencies. She just walked right in and found me sitting in the living room. "Liz," she said, her voice sharp, "we need to talk about what you've done." Grace is 3 years younger than me, though you wouldn't know it to look at us. She's had work done, Botox, fillers, something that keeps her face smooth and tight. She married a man who owns 3 car dealerships, and she hasn't worked a day since. "What I've done," I repeated. "You've humiliated Courtney. You've embarrassed the entire family. How could you cancel her wedding without even telling her, without discussing it? She found out when the venue called to confirm the cancellation. Do you have any idea how that felt for her?" I tried to explain. I told Grace about the ice sculpture, about Courtney's screaming, about the $75,000 I'd already spent, about how my retirement savings were disappearing into a bottomless pit of wedding expenses. Grace waved her hand dismissively. So she got a little emotional about the ice sculpture. She's stressed. Planning a wedding is stressful. You're her mother. You're supposed to support her, not punish her. I told Grace about what Patricia saw, about Courtney at Luigi's Steakhouse with another man. Grace's face hardened. Patricia probably saw wrong. She's getting older too. Maybe her eyes aren't what they used to be. You're just looking for excuses to justify what you did. That stung worse than I expected. "I'm not making excuses," I said. Grace sat down across from me. Her expression shifted into something that looked like pity, which was somehow worse than anger. "Liz, honey, I think you're having trouble processing Harold's death. I know it's been 3 years, but grief does strange things to people. Maybe you're not thinking clearly. Maybe you're experiencing some kind of breakdown." I felt cold all over. "I'm completely clear-headed," I said. "Are you, though?" Grace asked gently. "Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like someone who's not herself. Courtney mentioned you've been forgetful lately, getting confused. Maybe this is early dementia. Maybe it's the stress of being alone. Either way, I think you need to see someone. A therapist. Maybe a doctor." I couldn't speak. My own sister was suggesting I was mentally incompetent. Grace stood up. "I'm going to go now. But Liz, you need to make this right. Call Courtney. Apologize. See if you can salvage what's left of the wedding. She's your daughter. She needs you. And honestly, you need her too. You're all alone in this house. What kind of life is that?" She left. The door clicked shut behind her, and I sat there feeling like I'd been slapped. That evening, Todd called. Unlike Grace, Todd was gentle, soft-spoken. He's a high school guidance counselor, and he has that calm, measured way of talking that probably works great with teenagers but made me feel patronized. "Liz," he said, "I heard what happened. I'm not here to take sides. I just want to understand." I explained everything again. I was getting tired of explaining. Todd listened. Then he said, "I believe you that Courtney has been taking advantage financially. That's not okay. But Liz, canceling the wedding without telling her seems extreme. I'm worried about you. Grace mentioned she thinks you might be struggling mentally." "Not you too," I said. "I'm not saying that," Todd said quickly, "but I am saying that maybe you're not seeing this situation clearly. You've been alone for 3 years. That's hard. Maybe you're holding on too tight to Courtney because she's all you have left. And maybe when she pulled away, you overreacted." I wanted to scream. Instead, I said very quietly, "I did not overreact. I set a boundary. There's a difference." "Okay," Todd said, clearly trying to placate me. "Okay, but will you at least think about talking to Courtney, trying to work this out? She's still your daughter." After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my living room and wondered if I was crazy. If everyone else saw something I couldn't see. If I really was having some kind of breakdown. Then I thought about that receipt at Luigi's Steakhouse. About Patricia's eyes. About the way Courtney's face had twisted with rage when I questioned one expense among hundreds. No, I wasn't crazy, but I needed to prove it. The next morning I drove back to Luigi's Steakhouse. It was a 40-minute drive to the upscale part of town where everything costs twice what it should. The restaurant didn't open until 11, so I waited in my car, sipping coffee from a travel mug and rehearsing what I'd say. At 11 on the dot, I walked inside. The interior was all dark wood and low lighting, the kind of place that's trying very hard to be sophisticated. A hostess greeted me with a professional smile. "I need to speak with the manager," I said. "Is there a problem?" she asked. "No, I just need some information." She disappeared into the back and returned a minute later with a woman around 40, wearing a black suit and an expression of polite concern. "I'm Susan," the manager said. "How can I help you?" I took a breath and explained. "My daughter dined here 3 weeks ago, Tuesday night. I'm trying to verify something, and I was hoping you might keep reservation records." Susan studied me for a moment. I think she was trying to decide if I was a problem or just a concerned mother. Then she said, "We do keep records. Let me check." She led me to her office, a tiny room cluttered with schedules and invoices. She pulled up something on her computer, scrolled, clicked. "Yes," she said. "Tuesday, 3 weeks ago. Reservation under Courtney Walsh. Party of 2, 7 o'clock. My heart was pounding. "Did you see them?" I asked. "Do you remember them?" Susan thought for a moment. "Actually, yes. I remember them because they ordered our most expensive wine. A bottle that costs $300. Not many people order that." "What did they look like?" I asked. "Young woman, late 20s. Very pretty. Dark hair. The man was around the same age. Brown hair, I think. Nice suit. They seemed very affectionate." It was true. Patricia had been right. "One more thing," I said. "My daughter used one of my credit cards that night. Would you be able to show me the receipt?" Susan hesitated. That's not really something I can just show. I understand, I said, but this is my credit card. I'm trying to determine if it was used without my full knowledge. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just need to see. Something in my face must have convinced her. Susan pulled up the transaction, then printed out a copy. She handed it to me, and there it was. Total bill $450. Wine, 2 steaks, appetizers, desserts. Charged to a credit card in my name. One I'd given Courtney years ago for emergencies. My daughter had taken another man to an expensive restaurant and charged the date to my card. Thank you, I said quietly. Susan touched my arm as I was leaving. I have a daughter too, she said. I hope things work out. I made copies of the receipt at a print shop. 5 copies. Then I went home and called a family meeting. I texted Grace, Todd, and their spouses. I have proof about Courtney's cheating. We need to meet, my house, tomorrow at 2. They all agreed. I think they were curious. Or maybe they thought I'd come to my senses and wanted to apologize. The next day, I set up chairs in my living room. I laid out the receipts on the coffee table, along with a written statement from Patricia describing what she'd seen. I'd asked her to write it all down, dates and details. Grace arrived first with her husband, Dan. Todd came with his wife, Marcy. They sat down, looking uncomfortable and concerned. Then Courtney walked in. I hadn't invited her, but somehow she'd found out about the meeting. Later I learned that Marcy had mentioned it to her daughter, who'd mentioned it to Courtney. Courtney walked into my living room with Brandon at her side. She looked fragile, thin. Her eyes were red and puffy. She was wearing a simple dress and no makeup, the picture of a wounded daughter. "Mom," she said softly, "I heard you wanted to talk to the family about me." I hadn't expected this. I'd wanted to present the evidence to my siblings first, get them on my side, then confront Courtney together. But now she was here, and everyone was looking at me. I picked up the receipt and handed it to Grace. "This is from Luigi's Steakhouse," I said, 3 weeks ago. Courtney had dinner there with a man who wasn't Brandon. She charged it to my credit card. $450. Grace studied the receipt. Courtney was already talking. "That was Brandon's cousin Marcus," she said. Her voice was small and hurt. He was visiting from Seattle. Brandon had to work late, so I offered to show Marcus around the city. I used Mom's card because mine wasn't working that day. The magnetic strip was damaged. I was going to pay her back. Brandon nodded. Marcus was visiting, he confirmed. I was stuck at the office on a project deadline. I felt bad I couldn't take him out myself. "But Patricia saw them kissing," I said, holding hands. Courtney's eyes filled with tears. "Patricia saw us hugging goodbye. Marcus is family. We're affectionate. I can't believe my own mother is twisting that into something ugly." "The receipt doesn't show who she dined with," Grace pointed out, "just that there was a reservation under her name and 2 people ate there." I felt the ground shifting under me. Courtney had an answer for everything. She'd thought this through. Todd cleared his throat. "Liz," he said carefully, "I think maybe you're seeing things that aren't there because you want to justify canceling the wedding." "I'm not making this up," I said. My voice came out louder than I intended. Grace set down the receipt. "Liz," she said, "I'm concerned. You went to the restaurant and questioned the staff. You got them to print private transaction records. That's borderline stalking." I was verifying my own credit card charges, I protested. Courtney was crying now, real tears streaming down her face. Brandon put his arm around her. "I can't believe this," she sobbed. "My own mother is making up lies about me. She's trying to destroy my relationship because she can't stand to see me happy." "That's not true," I said. "Isn't it?" Courtney shot back. Her voice cracked. "You've always been controlling, always trying to run my life. I've tried so hard to make you proud, but nothing I do is ever good enough. And now that I'm finally getting married, finally starting my own life, you can't handle it, so you're sabotaging me." I looked around the room. Grace looked sympathetic to Courtney. Todd looked deeply uncomfortable. Dan and Marcy wouldn't meet my eyes. "I think you need help, Mom," Courtney said softly. "I think you're not well, and I love you, but I can't let you keep hurting me like this." She stood up. Brandon stood with her. "I'm taking legal action," Courtney said. "I've consulted with a lawyer about getting a restraining order against you for harassment." and about suing you for the wedding deposits you canceled. You verbally promised to pay for my wedding. That's a legally binding gift. You can't take it back just because you changed your mind." Brandon spoke up. "We don't want to do this, Liz. But you're not leaving us a choice. You canceled everything without warning. You're spreading false accusations. You're trying to destroy Courtney's reputation. We have to protect ourselves." They left. The door closed. The room was silent. Finally, Todd said, "Liz, I think you should apologize." But I knew the truth. I knew what I'd seen on that receipt. I knew what Patricia had witnessed. None of this was in my head. The problem was, I couldn't prove it. Not in a way that mattered. After everyone left, I sat alone in my house and realized my attempt to expose the truth had only made everything worse. Now I was facing legal action. From my own daughter. The letter arrived 4 days later. Official, intimidating, from the law offices of Bentley and Shaw. I stared at the envelope for a full minute before I could bring myself to open it. Inside was a demand letter. Courtney's attorney was requesting $15,000 in damages for the canceled wedding. The letter cited something called promissory estoppel, claiming that my promise to pay for the wedding was legally binding, and that Courtney had relied on that promise to her detriment. By canceling without notice, I had breached that promise and caused her financial and emotional harm. The letter also informed me that Courtney had filed for a restraining order and that I was required to appear at a hearing in 1 week. My hands shook as I read it. I'd never been involved in any legal matter beyond signing mortgage papers and writing a will. The language was cold and formal, making me sound like a criminal. I called Daniel Crawford that afternoon. Daniel had been Harold's friend from college. He'd handled Harold's estate after he died, and he'd been kind to me during that awful time. When I explained what was happening, he asked me to come to his office immediately. Daniel's office was in a converted house downtown, the kind of place that felt more like a living room than a law firm. He poured me coffee and listened while I explained everything from the beginning. The wedding expenses, the screaming, the cancellations, the cheating suspicion, the family meeting that had backfired, and now this letter. When I finished, Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Liz, I'm going to be honest with you. The lawsuit is probably frivolous, but defending it will still cost you money. Legal fees could run $10,000 to $15,000, even if you win." "But I'll win," I asked. "Probably. Courts generally don't enforce promises for gifts, especially from parents to children. But nothing is guaranteed. And the restraining order is a separate issue. That could go either way." I felt sick. "What does a restraining order mean?" I asked. "If the judge grants it, you won't be able to contact Courtney. You'll have to stay at least 500 feet away from her. If you violate it, you could be arrested." My own daughter was trying to get me legally barred from contacting her. Daniel pulled out a notepad. "Let's go through everything you have. Credit card statements, emails, text messages, anything that shows the pattern of financial dependency and the circumstances leading to your decision." We spent 2 hours going through my records. Daniel made notes, asked questions, built a timeline. When we finished, he sat back and said, "You have a strong case for why you canceled the wedding. But the restraining order is what worries me. She's claiming harassment and emotional abuse. She has that restaurant incident as evidence of you supposedly stalking her." "I wasn't stalking her," I said. "I was verifying my own credit card charges." "I know. But perception matters in court. And Liz, you need to prepare yourself. Courtney's lawyer will make you look bad. That's their job. They'll paint you as controlling, unstable, vindictive. They'll say you're weaponizing money to punish your daughter for trying to be independent." I left Daniel's office feeling worse than when I'd arrived. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about standing in front of a judge while my daughter accused me of being abusive. The next few days passed in a blur of anxiety. Daniel prepared my defense, asked me to write a statement explaining everything, gathered character references from friends and former coworkers. But I felt like I was drowning. Then, 3 days before the hearing, I decided to go through 5 years of credit card statements. All the cards I'd given Courtney. I wanted to see the full picture. I wanted to understand exactly how much money had disappeared. I spread the statements across my dining room table. It took me 6 hours to go through them all, highlighting every charge, adding them up on a calculator. The total made me feel physically ill. Over $200,000. $200,000 in charges over 5 years. But that wasn't even the worst part. As I went through line by line, I found dozens of charges I'd never known about. Luxury handbags from stores I'd never heard of, jewelry, spa days, expensive hotels in cities I didn't know Courtney had visited. There were charges to furniture stores. Courtney had told me she was furnishing her apartment with second-hand items from friends. But here was an $8,000 custom sofa from a high-end furniture store. I called the store number listed on the receipt. A cheerful sales associate answered. I explained that I was calling about an order from 9 months ago, gave her the transaction number. "Oh yes," she said. "The custom sectional. Beautiful piece. It was delivered to a storage unit, if I remember correctly." "A storage unit," I repeated. "Not an apartment." "That's right. Let me pull up the address." She gave me an address across town, a storage facility called Secure Space. Why would Courtney have furniture delivered to a storage unit? I called Patricia. She came over within the hour. When I showed her what I'd found, her eyes went wide. "We have to go look," Patricia said. We drove to Secure Space that afternoon. It was a massive facility, rows and rows of garage-style units. I had the unit number from the furniture store delivery receipt. We found it easily, Unit 217. The door was locked, obviously, but there was a gap at the bottom, maybe 3 inches. Patricia got down on her knees and peered underneath with her phone flashlight. "Liz," she said, "there are boxes in there. Lots of boxes. I can see labels, designer brands." We found the facility office. The manager was a tired-looking man in his 50s who clearly didn't get paid enough to deal with drama. I explained that I believed my daughter was storing items purchased with my credit cards, and I needed to know what was in the unit. He looked uncomfortable. "I can't just let you into someone else's unit," he said. I showed him the credit card statements, the furniture store receipt with the unit number. I showed him my ID, proving the cards were mine. He sighed. "Look, I sympathize. But legally, the renter of the unit is the only one who can authorize access. Can you at least tell me who rents it?" I asked. He checked his computer. "Courtney Walsh. She rents 3 units, actually." "3," I said. My voice came out as a whisper. "Yeah. 217, 218, and 219, all in a row. She's actually behind on payment for one of them, 219. If she doesn't pay in the next week, it goes to auction." 3 storage units full of merchandise purchased with my money. Merchandise I'd never seen, never knew existed. Patricia and I sat in my car in the parking lot afterward, both of us too stunned to speak. Finally, Patricia said, "She's been reselling things. It's the only explanation. She buys expensive items with your money, stores them, and sells them online. She's running a business using your credit cards as inventory financing." I felt numb. This wasn't just a spoiled daughter overspending. This was systematic. This was fraud. But the restraining order hearing was in 3 days. And I still had no way to prove any of this that would matter in court. The morning of the restraining order hearing, I dressed carefully. Daniel had advised me to look professional, but not intimidating. I wore a navy blue dress and pearl earrings Harold had given me on our 20th anniversary. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the exhausted woman staring back. The courthouse was downtown, an imposing building with marble floors and high ceilings that made every sound echo. Daniel met me outside the courtroom. He squeezed my shoulder and said, "Just tell the truth. That's all you can do." Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, an American flag in the corner. Courtney was already there with her lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in an expensive suit. Courtney wore a simple gray dress. No makeup. Hair pulled back. She looked young and vulnerable and scared. I almost didn't recognize my own daughter. The judge was an older man, probably in his 70s, with reading glasses and an impatient expression. He called our case number, and Courtney's lawyer stood up. For the next hour, I watched my daughter destroy me. Courtney took the stand and testified. Her voice shook. She described me as controlling and manipulative. She said I'd used money to keep her dependent on me her entire adult life. That whenever she tried to make decisions for herself, I threatened to cut her off. that when she finally stood up to me about the wedding, I retaliated by canceling everything without warning. She cried. Real tears. She talked about the trauma of getting phone calls from vendors telling her the wedding was canceled, about the humiliation of having to tell her fiancé and her friends, about the fear she now felt because I was stalking her, investigating her, trying to control every aspect of her life. Her lawyer submitted text messages I'd sent. Out of context, they sounded harsh. One from 6 months ago where I'd said, if you can't manage money better, we need to talk about the cards. Another where I'd written, I'm not made of money, Courtney. You need to be more responsible. The lawyer showed the court a statement from the Luigi's Steakhouse manager, confirming that I'd come in demanding to see private records. She made it sound sinister, like I was harassing businesses to spy on my daughter. Then Brandon testified. He corroborated everything, said he was genuinely worried about Courtney's safety, that I'd become obsessed with destroying their relationship, that my behavior had become increasingly erratic since my husband died. A therapist testified. Courtney had apparently seen her twice in the past 2 weeks. The therapist talked about signs of emotional abuse from a parental figure. Anxiety, depression, fear. When it was my turn to testify, I tried to explain. I talked about the storage units, the $200,000 in charges, the pattern of excessive spending. Courtney's lawyer objected repeatedly. Irrelevant, Your Honor. This hearing is about harassment and safety, not financial disputes. The judge sustained most of the objections. Daniel tried to submit the credit card statements. The judge barely glanced at them. I'm not here to litigate financial disputes between a mother and daughter, he said. That's a matter for civil court. What I need to determine is whether there's a credible threat of harassment. After 2 hours, the judge made his ruling. He granted a temporary 30-day restraining order. I was to stay at least 500 feet away from Courtney. No contact of any kind. No phone calls, no texts, no emails, no showing up at her apartment or her workplace. In 30 days, there would be another hearing to determine if it should be made permanent. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Outside the courtroom, I saw Grace and Todd. They'd been sitting in the back. I hadn't even noticed them during the hearing. Grace looked away when I tried to make eye contact. Todd gave me a brief, sympathetic hug, but didn't say anything. Daniel walked me to my car. I'm sorry, Liz, he said, but this isn't over. We can fight this at the next hearing. We just need to build a stronger case. I drove home in a daze. When I got there, I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. That night was the lowest point of my life. Lower even than the night Harold died. At least then, I'd had people around me. Support, sympathy. Now I was alone, labeled as an abuser by my own daughter, rejected by my family, legally forbidden from contacting the child I'd raised and sacrificed for. I thought about giving up. About just paying Courtney the $15,000 she was demanding. About apologizing for everything and trying to rebuild some kind of relationship, even if it meant letting her continue to take advantage of me. I was seriously considering it when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello, I said. Is this Liz Walsh? A young woman's voice asked. Yes. My name is Ashley Porter. I was Courtney's roommate 2 years ago. I saw something on social media about the court hearing today. I think I need to tell you something about your daughter. I sat up straighter. What? I asked. Can we meet in person? Ashley said. I don't want to do this over the phone. We agreed to meet the next morning at a coffee shop halfway between our houses. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay in bed wondering what this stranger could possibly tell me. The coffee shop was busy with the morning rush. Ashley was easy to spot. She was maybe 25, with blonde hair and anxious eyes. She had a laptop bag and a nervous energy. We got coffee and sat at a corner table. Ashley didn't waste time. I need to tell you that Courtney did this before, she said. 2 years ago, she was engaged to another man. His name was Austin. His mother was paying for the wedding. Courtney picked a fight with her about 2 weeks before the wedding. She got Austin's mother so upset that the mother canceled all the deposits. Then Courtney sued her for emotional distress and breach of promise. The mother settled out of court, $20,000. I felt cold all over. How do you know this? I asked. I was living with Courtney when it happened. I heard her on the phone with a lawyer. She was laughing about it. She called it her payday plan. Ashley pulled out her laptop and showed me screenshots of text messages between her and Courtney. Courtney bragging about how easy it was to manipulate Austin's mother. How the settlement money would cover her rent for a year. The merchandise in those storage units, Ashley continued, that's part of it too. Courtney's been running this scam for years. She gets money from people, buys resellable goods, hoards them while she creates conflict, then sues. When she gets the settlement, she sells all the goods for additional profit. She's made over $100,000 this way. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I saw what happened in court yesterday. I saw that she's doing it again, and I can't just watch it happen to another person. Ashley's eyes filled with tears. Last time she threatened me, said if I ever told anyone, she'd destroy me. I was scared. I moved out, but I kept all the evidence. I knew someday it might matter. Will you testify? I asked. Will you tell a judge what you just told me? Ashley hesitated. I'm scared, she admitted. But yes, I will, because this has to stop. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. The next morning, I met with Daniel and brought Ashley with me. In Daniel's office, Ashley laid out everything. She had screenshots of text messages. She had emails. She even had photos she'd taken of Courtney's storage units 2 years ago when she'd helped Courtney move some boxes. Daniel listened carefully, taking notes. When Ashley finished, he sat back in his chair. This changes everything, he said. This establishes a pattern of fraudulent behavior. But we have a problem. We need to find Austin's mother. We need her testimony too. Ashley knew Austin's last name, Brennan. Daniel hired a private investigator who tracked her down in 3 days. Helen Brennan. She lived in a town about 40 miles away. Daniel and I drove there together. Helen's house was a modest ranch with a well-kept garden. When she opened the door and I introduced myself, her face went pale. You're Courtney's mother, she said. Yes. Can we please talk? She hesitated, then let us in. Her living room was neat and comfortable, filled with family photos. We sat down, and I told her everything that had happened. As I talked, Helen started crying. She did the same thing to me, Helen said. Exactly the same. We were so excited about the wedding. Austin was my youngest, my baby. But Courtney kept pushing for more expensive things. I was already spending more than I could afford. When I finally said no to something, I can't even remember what it was, she screamed at me. Told me I was ruining their special day. Then Austin called me the next day and said his mother couldn't handle the stress and they were canceling. Just like that, everything was canceled. You didn't cancel it, I asked. No, they did. But somehow, when the lawsuit came, it was framed as if I'd backed out on a promise. My lawyer said it would cost more to fight than to settle, so I paid her $20,000. Helen wiped her eyes. I was so humiliated, so hurt. I moved here to get away from the memories. Austin and I barely speak anymore. He married someone else last year. He didn't even tell me until after the wedding. I'm so sorry, I said. Daniel leaned forward. Helen, would you be willing to testify about what happened? This could stop Courtney from doing this to anyone else. Helen looked scared. I signed a non-disclosure agreement as part of the settlement. If I talk about it, Courtney can sue me. Daniel nodded. That's true, but I think the risk is worth it. And with Ashley's testimony and the evidence we have, a judge might see this as a pattern of fraud that supersedes the NDA. Helen thought for a long moment. Then she said, All right, I'll do it. Because what she did to me destroyed my relationship with my son. I don't want her to destroy your relationship with your daughter even more than she already has. We left Helen's house with a signed statement and copies of her court documents from the settlement. Daniel was optimistic. We're building a real case now, he said. But I had another idea. The storage units, the merchandise, that was physical evidence. I called Patricia. Remember how the manager said one unit was overdue on payment? I asked. Yes, Patricia said. What if we could get police involved? What if we reported the merchandise as stolen property? Patricia was quiet for a moment. That's smart, but you'll need proof that the purchases were unauthorized. I have 5 years of credit card statements, I said. And I never gave Courtney permission to charge $200,000. We called the police non-emergency line. I explained the situation. They connected me to the fraud division. A detective named Sergeant Walsh agreed to meet with me. Sergeant Walsh was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s. I met her at the police station and presented everything: the credit card statements, the storage unit information, Ashley's testimony about the pattern of behavior, Helen's settlement documents. Sergeant Walsh listened carefully. "This is clearly a pattern," she said. "But here's the problem. If Courtney claims you gave her permission to use the cards, it becomes a civil dispute, not a criminal matter. We need proof that she intended to defraud you from the beginning." "What kind of proof?" I asked. "Evidence that she was systematically converting your money into resellable assets without your knowledge. Evidence of her online sales. Bank records showing she was profiting. Tax returns showing she didn't report the income." "I can get the online sales information," I said. "I'm sure of it." Sergeant Walsh opened an investigation. She interviewed Ashley. She interviewed Helen. She got a warrant for the storage units based on probable cause of fraud. 2 days later, the storage units were opened. Sergeant Walsh let me know what they found. Over $150,000 worth of merchandise. Designer handbags still with tags. Electronics still in boxes. Furniture. Jewelry. All of it unused. All of it inventory. The forensics team found Courtney's online seller accounts. She'd made over $80,000 reselling items purchased with my credit cards. She had bank accounts I'd never known about. And when they pulled her tax returns, she'd reported none of that income. The IRS was notified. Within a week, Courtney was charged with fraud, grand theft, and tax evasion. She was arrested at her apartment. Brandon, who'd known nothing about any of this, was horrified. He broke off the engagement immediately. The restraining order was dismissed. Courtney's lawsuit was withdrawn. Her lawyer dropped her as a client. The local news picked up the story. Woman arrested for scamming multiple mothers. It spread through our town like wildfire. Grace called me, sobbing. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I should have believed you. I was so wrong." Todd came to my house in person. He hugged me and said, "I'm sorry I doubted you. You were right all along." Courtney pleaded guilty as part of a plea deal. She was sentenced to 3 years probation, mandatory therapy, and full restitution. She had to pay me back $200,000. Her assets were seized: the merchandise in the storage units, her bank accounts, which held $60,000 from her scams over the years. I recovered $90,000 immediately. The prosecutor told me I'd receive more as the merchandise was liquidated and sold. But the money wasn't what mattered anymore. 6 months later, I sat in Patricia's backyard on a warm Sunday afternoon. She'd invited me for dinner, along with Grace and Todd and their families. It was the first time we'd all been together since everything had happened. Grace had apologized 100 times. She'd sent flowers, cards, long letters explaining how ashamed she was. I'd forgiven her, though it took time. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal overnight, but we were rebuilding, slowly. Todd had been easier to forgive. He'd always been more cautious in his judgments, less quick to assume I was wrong. He'd admitted he should have trusted his instincts about Courtney, that he'd seen signs of her manipulation but hadn't wanted to believe his niece was capable of that level of deception. We sat around Patricia's patio table, eating grilled chicken and pasta salad, talking about normal things: the weather, Todd's students, Grace's upcoming trip to visit her grandchildren. It felt almost like before. Almost. My relationship with Courtney was over. Not legally, not formally, but in every way that mattered. She'd written me a letter 3 months into her probation. Her therapist had approved it, had probably encouraged it. The letter was pages long. In it, Courtney admitted everything: the scams, the manipulation, the way she'd systematically used me and others. She said she'd been in therapy 3 times a week, working to understand why she'd become the person she'd become. She didn't make excuses. She didn't blame anyone. She just said she was sorry, that she understood I might never forgive her, that she didn't expect me to have a relationship with her again, but that she wanted me to know she was getting help. She was trying to change. I kept that letter in my nightstand drawer. I read it sometimes, but I hadn't responded. I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. The truth was, I didn't know if the daughter I'd raised still existed, or if she ever had. Maybe I'd been in denial for years, seeing what I wanted to see, instead of what was really there. Maybe I'd enabled her so much that I'd helped create the person she'd become. That was something I had to live with. That was my part in all of this. But I'd also learned something important. I'd learned that love doesn't mean letting someone destroy you, that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, that walking away from a toxic relationship, even with your own child, isn't failure. It's survival. I'd joined a support group for parents of adult children who'd financially abused them. I was shocked to discover how common it was, how many people had similar stories, how much shame and isolation we'd all felt, thinking we were alone. I'd started writing about my experience, just journal entries at first, but then those entries became essays. I'd sent one to a parenting magazine, and they'd published it. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people reached out, sharing their own stories, thanking me for speaking up. A literary agent had contacted me. She thought there was a book in this, a book about financial abuse within families, about the difficulty of setting boundaries with people you love, about the journey from enabling to empowerment. I was writing that book now. It was hard, emotionally exhausting, but also healing. I'd taken the $90,000 I'd recovered and put it back into my retirement account. The prosecutors said I'd likely recover more, but I wasn't counting on it. What I had was enough. I'd learned to live on less, to be more careful, to understand that money couldn't buy love, and trying to use it that way only created resentment. Harold used to say something I'd never fully understood until now. He'd say, "Don't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm." I'd spent years setting myself on fire, burning through my savings, my retirement, my peace of mind, all to keep Courtney warm, to keep her happy, to keep her from leaving me. But when she finally told me to get out of her life, something inside me shifted. I realized that I'd been gone for years. I'd disappeared into the role of provider, of enabler, of endless resource. I'd forgotten how to be Liz. Just Liz. Not Courtney's mother, not Harold's widow, just a woman with her own needs and boundaries and worth. Standing up to Courtney had been the hardest thing I'd ever done. Harder than nursing through a pandemic. Harder than watching Harold die. Harder than anything. But it had also been the most important thing. Because I'd learned that I could survive losing someone I loved. That I could face the disapproval of my family and still know I was right. That I could be alone and not be lonely. My daughter had needed to fall to learn to stand. I didn't know if she'd ever fully get up, if therapy would help, if she'd really change. That wasn't my responsibility anymore. My responsibility was to myself, to the life I still had ahead of me, to the peace I'd fought so hard to find. I looked around Patricia's patio at the people who'd stood by me. Patricia, who'd told me the truth even when it was hard. Grace and Todd, who'd come back after they realized their mistake. Their spouses and children, who were part of my family too. This was enough. This was good. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Patricia brought out dessert, homemade apple pie. We ate and talked and laughed. For the first time in months, I felt something close to happiness. Later, driving home in the gathering darkness, I thought about that night 6 months ago when Courtney had screamed at me to get out of her life. How I'd driven to the bank and dropped those cancellation forms in the night deposit box. It had felt like the end of everything. But it had actually been the beginning. The beginning of understanding my own worth. The beginning of recognizing abuse for what it was. The beginning of choosing myself. If I could go back and talk to that version of me, sitting in her dark kitchen with shaking hands, I'd tell her, "You're doing the right thing. It's going to hurt worse before it gets better. You're going to lose people you thought would always be there. You're going to question everything you thought you knew. But you're also going to find out that you're stronger than you ever imagined. That you can survive what feels unsurvivable. That peace is worth fighting for even when the cost seems too high." I pulled into my driveway, parked, sat for a moment looking at my house, my home. The place I'd shared with Harold, raised Courtney, built a life. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like mine. I'd learned something that I wished every parent could understand before they went through what I went through. Your children don't owe you anything, but you don't owe them everything either. Love isn't measured in dollars, and neither is worth. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is to let them face the consequences of their choices. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is to stop setting yourself on fire. I got out of my car and walked into my house, turning on lights, filling the space with warmth. Tomorrow I'd write another chapter of my book. I'd meet with my support group. I'd have lunch with Patricia. I'd live my life. Not the life I'd planned. Not the life I'd imagined when Courtney was a baby, and I held her and promised I'd always protect her. But a good life. An honest life. A life where I wasn't diminishing myself to accommodate someone else's bottomless needs. A life where I mattered too. And that, I'd learned, was worth everything. So let me ask you something. Have you ever loved someone so much that you forgot to love yourself? Have you ever given so much that you lost sight of where you ended and they began? If you have, I want you to know that setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish. Walking away from someone who's hurting you doesn't make you heartless. Choosing yourself isn't betrayal. It's survival. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you experienced financial abuse from a family member? How did you handle it? What boundaries have you learned to set? Your story might help someone else who's struggling with the same situation right now. And if you found value in hearing my story, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories and realize they're not alone. Subscribe to this channel for more real-life stories about overcoming family conflict, setting boundaries, and finding peace. And share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Maybe someone who's giving too much. Maybe someone who's forgotten their own worth. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. I hope you found something in it that helps you, whether that's validation, inspiration, or just the knowledge that you're not the only one struggling. Take care of yourself. You deserve that. You really do.